It's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Lori Flinders-McMillan. Lori is an Anishinaabkwe and community member of Couchiching First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Lori has a Master of Social Work from Wilfrid Laurier and is a certified First Nations health manager. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Binesiwag Center for Wellness, which she launched in 2019. Lori's knowledge bundle includes over 25 years of experience in social work leadership, management, program and staff development, mentorship, and mental health and addictions counseling. During her career, she worked as a senior leader in both child and family services and health. Lori has been a trainer with both OASW and ANCFSAO, where she shared the agency's best practice bicultural model of service provision for family services. She also published an Indigenous mental health and addictions leading practice with Accreditation Canada and is currently researching traditional customary family systems. In her spare time, Lori enjoys creative writing and has been published in First Lady Nation, Volumes 1 and 4, and Before the Usual Time, a collection of Indigenous stories and poems. Lori carries an Anishinaabe traditional bundle that includes knowledge in medicines, lands-based healing and methodologies, ceremonies, and she has relationships with numerous elders, helpers, and healers. Lori's greatest accomplishment is being the mother of 2 beautiful daughters and 5 amazing grandchildren who call her Cookum. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lori. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, now I gotta do my screen share. Sorry, I was muted. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see that? Yes, okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. So I'm going to start out the way I would start out in any gathering, and that's by introducing myself in my traditional names, my clan, my community, and as a title that I carry that wasn't in the bio. So Buju Buju, Giwet no Binesiwag Ajawekwe Widamokindago, Biju Nindo Dem, Kuching Nindunji, Bejago Madekwe. I also acknowledge that, so my clan is Lynx clan, and I also acknowledge that my family is part of the Bear clan. And I told you what I shared with your spirit, my spirit names, which were Ajawekwe Widamuk and Giwet no Binesiwag, and each one of those carries a story with them. And at some point, maybe we'll be together again and I can unfold that story bundle for you, because they are very much a part of my practice bundle as well. So I always like to start off just like, who am I and what do I know anyway? And I like to share just a little story with you from my days of working in child and family services. I worked for an organization called Wichitawin that's in Southern Treaty 3 territory and services 10 First Nations communities. And I credit this organization with building my practice bundle and filling it up with what it meant to be an Anishinaabe social work practitioner, what it meant to be an Anishinaabe helper to the people we worked for. And during that time, I had a very dynamic executive director. His name is George Samard, and he would challenge us in many different ways to be the best possible helpers we could be for our people. Because in Vanessa's land acknowledgement this morning, I really appreciate that she identified the impact social workers have had in our First Nations communities, in our Indigenous communities, with that history of colonial colonization. So getting back to George, we would have Monday morning staff meeting, and on more than a few occasions during my 13 or so years there, this question would come up. And at one point he directed it right at me, and he said to me, Lori Flinders, what legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to perpetuate the status quo in social work practice, or do you want to leave a legacy of real change? And I always think about that in the practice bundle that I carry, and I call it a bundle because for me, different parts of that bundle unfold in my practice. If I'm doing work like this, presenting, and I've presented all across Turtle Island in different modalities around Indigenous social work practice, or if I'm sitting in my private mental health and addictions practice, sitting and visiting with people. And here at Binesiwag Center for Wellness, we're empowering resilience, and we don't call them sessions, we call them visiting with people and really seeing them. So in saying that, that's just a little kind of backstory to the presentation I'm about to give to you. And in locating myself, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my roles and responsibilities as a kokum first to those grandchildren, and to carry on the teachings that have been passed on to me in my bundle that I carry, the sacred bundle that I carry as a helper, as Medewan, doing the work for the people. I also carry a sweat lodge that I utilize with my family, and my little granddaughter, the oldest one, is one of the helpers for me in the work I do there with people. I have roles and responsibilities as an auntie, not only like in the Western sense of the word auntie, meaning like a sister or brother to your parents, but auntie meaning someone who's older than you, who shares with you some of their life experience and some of their bundled teachings. I know who I am today, and I didn't for a long time. Much like many of the people I sit and visit with. I have a story that includes that legacy of the residential school system. I'm a second generation survivor. My grandmother, the residential school did its work. She wouldn't speak her language. She was very much committed to the Catholic Church. She raised her children to all be baptized and attend church. My grandfather, on the other hand, retained his language and spoke the language, but it was never allowed to be passed on to their children, one of which was my mother, who was the oldest in the family. So when I began to awaken my blood memory, that memory that holds those traditions and those ceremonies and those ways of being, knowing, and doing, it was difficult for me because my grandma also raised me. That's another part of traditional family systems. Not so much that I lived with her full time, but my mother was only 17 when I came to be. And so she was very young. So my grandma took a really active role in my child rearing. So when I began to follow this path of our traditional ways of being, she had some hesitancies with me. And as I reflect upon it now, because she went to Spirit World about a year and a half ago now, and I remember her sitting there and talking to me about her experience in residential school and just that pain that came out, and it impacts all of our families and all of our communities. If you're Indigenous, then it's most likely that your family has been impacted in some way by that residential school system. So some of those traditional bundles that have came to me that I utilized my practice is knowledge of medicines. I've worked with Kathy and Carl Bird up at Matutu Lake for the past 7 years, learning about our traditional medicines and how they can be utilized in my practice here with my visits with people and as a helper to the people. I also am a pipe carrier and I carry a song bundle with my hand drum that I utilize in practice as well. And then moving to my academic bundle, I was first an early childhood educator, and I worked in our community's daycare center. And I got to play and have fun and work with little people and work with families. But I had a calling, and that came through a dream. And the reason I'm sharing a lot of this with you is because this is the experience that many of the people that you work with may talk about, having a dream and what that dream means in terms of our culture and how we may follow these dreams. So I had this dream that gave me direction to pursue another path, to be a helper. And I went into social work practice. That's when I went to Wichita, and I worked at an adolescent group home for Indigenous youth. And I learned so much there from those youth. It was much different work. I wasn't playing anymore. It was very deep and serious things, which also spurred me to do a lot of my own healing work during that time. The other thing that happened during that time at this adolescent group home was that I was exposed to many elders. And for me, that was the first time that I had that much exposure to our knowledge keepers, our medicine people, our elders, and how they were coming together to help the people of Southern Treaty 3. And I asked to speak to a medicine man because I was starting my healing work, and I had a very stereotypical idea of what a medicine man was. So in my head, I was going to visit this real old, frail man who was just like having a big aura of knowledge and wisdom, and it was going to be really, spiritual. It was going to be a really spiritual visit. So I knew the protocols to bring my tobacco and to bring my gift. And I went in there, and there was this man who didn't look more than 60, dark hair, very heavy set. And he was so what are you looking for? And it really smashed a lot of those stereotypes that I had formulated in my mind about what it meant to go and see a medicine man or an elder, and that's important information also for those of you who have never sat with our elders or our medicine people or our ceremonial people or knowledge keepers. To be careful with what preconceived or assumptions that we come into our practice with. It was really eye-opening for me, and began a period of questioning. And that questioning also was around storytelling and around legend sharing and teachings. And our teachings are I've never experienced teachings in a way that were really explicit. They were more ideas through storytelling that left me with the responsibility to interpret it myself, because where I was at that time, at maybe 30-ish years old, or no, I guess a little bit younger, where I was at that time, I perceived those teachings in one way, and how I see them today is a much different way. And that's important information for my practice, working with First Nations or Anishinaabe Indigenous people who I work for as a helper. It's important because I remember what it was like back then to hear from one elder the same story. Like, let's take our creation stories, for example. For the Anishinaabe, there's a creation story. And if you go into some of the lodges that our people visit, that creation story gets expanded to days. But then if you go down to Six Nations, that was talked about from Vanessa too, their creation story is a lot different than ours. And that used to really confuse me. And I would think that these are myths, these are, fantasy and stuff like that. But I was given a really, really profound teaching that sounds really simple. And because I wanted to know the right story. if this is true, then that must not be true. There's no standardization in our creation stories that way. There's lots of different creation stories and they're all correct. And I struggled with that for a really long time, meaning that, and that's a lesson in that diversity that we may come across in our practices. And I was really, really lucky because I've got to sit with Indigenous folks from the East Coast to the West Coast, down into the States, in some of the work I've done with NICWA, which is the National Indian Child Welfare Association. So I've got to experience and visit with a lot of different Indigenous folks who all carry, their own creation stories. So that's just a little bit about the backstory about how I came to be where I am today. Now let's see, I don't know why this isn't clicking. Oh, there we go. So I just wanted to show a little map of where I am for those of you who aren't familiar with Couchiching First Nation. We're an adjoining community to Fort Frances, Ontario. And we've done a lot of work our company has done a lot of work up in Sault Ste. Marie. So this just kind of shows you where we are from Sault Ste. Marie. And I know that Sault Ste. Marie is still far from a lot of you as well. So that's just to give context of where I'm speaking to you from today in Southern Treaty 3 territory, my home community of Couchiching First Nation. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what it means to me to be an Anishinaabe social work practitioner or an Indigenous social worker. I want to talk to you about our giveaway ceremony. And throughout the course of those doings and those learnings, picking up that education bundle, but also picking up the education knowledge bundle of our ways of healing and wellness. And one of the teachings that's fundamental is that giveaway ceremony, and you can't keep it if you don't give it away. So bringing forth our experience, strength, and hope to others. Now, some of what I'm about to share is almost in contradiction to some of the theory that I would learn about, especially more so in my undergrad, because in my master's work with Laurier, I did the Indigenous field of study. Back then it was called the Aboriginal field of study. So a lot of the learning we did in circle. And a lot of the theory we did was rooted in our sacred, traditional, customary, and temporal laws of Indigenous folks. So one of the things I had to do first was to really understand consciously engaging with my blood memory. And what that means is my learning was an action word. It wasn't just about theory. So bringing to practice included sitting with elders, sitting in ceremony, helping lots of elders. That's how we learn, by going and visiting with knowledge keepers and elders. And if they need help harvesting medicine, or they need help putting their lodge together, or they need help with preparing food for feasts, to get in there and be that helper. Because to us here at Binesiwag, social work means being a helper, not a modern day missionary, but a helper to the people. And it's very much like the Western words we'd use is like client-centered care, strength-based, resiliency, trauma-informed. I had to know who I am and consciously remember or reclaim my identity in order to then bring that to my practice. So I participated in a lot of the doings of traditional healing or Indigenous healing. The other thing that happened as a result of you can't keep it if you don't give it away was that my family also began to feel the impacts of the work I was doing. What the residential school took away from my grandma and my mother, I was retrieving. And in retrieving that, my mother, my daughters, and now my grandchildren. For my grandchildren, it's just normal. It's not, it's just ordinary. It's not extraordinary. It's not, what I've heard it said a lot, the cultural piece. It's not that. It's the norm. It's the norm for us. The other thing that happened was before my grandma went through that western doorway back to spirit world, you know, she was really afraid. Remember in the beginning of the story, I talked to you about how she was very much a devoted Catholic, and in that, from the residential school and from her belief system, she was very, very afraid of our traditional Anishinaabe ceremonies. And she would warn me sometimes, don't go to that ceremony, you know, like it's not good and it's scary and all this stuff. And I would always just say, thank you for loving me so much that you're worried about me. And I would slowly start sharing with her some of the experiences I was having. But she also saw the impacts of that on my life and on the life of my children. And when my children were having their naming ceremony, my grandma came and participated. And when she came and participated, she brought me an eagle feather that was my grandfather's. And she said, I know he would have wanted you to have this because you're beginning to pave the way for, you know, like she didn't say it in those words, but beginning to pave the way for the reclaiming our identity as Anishinaabe. So to me, that was so beautiful. Like that was so beautiful to me and so healing for me and for her and for my kids and for my mom. So in saying that too, you know, we have a different way of looking at defining family systems within our culture, and it can get very, very complicated. And I don't know that some have written it down to help educate others. Like, for example, if we're sitting together and visiting and I say, oh yeah, my Uncle Peter, he blah, blah, blah. The natural assumption would be to think that my Uncle Peter was either one of my parents' sibling or my grandparents' sibling. But in our family systems, it's understood that that might be an older cousin or somebody close to the family, or it might be a family of choice or clan family. So even to build that bundle of understanding family, what included those doings. And we bring that to Binesiwag also in our social work practice. So we carry staff and organizational bundles. So what that means for us is we not only create opportunity for our staff to participate in ceremony, we sweat together once a quarter in order to keep ourselves cleaned up, in order to continue to, especially in these times, right? Like COVID has really taken a toll on mental health and addictions. In my community alone, in the past 2 years, we've lost over a dozen people to drug overdose because of the increase in drug use and the impacts on people's mental health. And so it's so important for us who sit and sit with these sacred stories that people are telling us to make sure that we aren't hanging on to it. So we sit and sweat together once a quarter with one of my sisters in the Maday Lodge, who's also a good friend, is Tina Armstrong from Ontario, or from Thunder Bay. And we do that to take care of ourselves. But it's also in taking care of ourselves, we're also learning about those protocols, and we're unpacking a lot of the garbage that, sorry, I'm going to reframe that. we're also unpacking those things that aren't meaningful to the people that we work with, including our own privilege. We have to unpack that for ourselves so we're not bringing it into those visits we're having with people. You know, we've been working lately with a community around developing their customary care codes. And we've heard a lot of stories, a lot of storytelling around the foster care system and its impacts on our families and communities, and how we interpret that Ontario legislation and put it into practice in our communities, and how we have attempted to indigenize it with a lot of our communities. And now it's time to take it to the next step, so that, but we can't rush it. We can't rush it. And sometimes there's jokes made about that, about how much we take our time. Again, be careful with the assumptions that you're understanding what that means. I had to be careful, because I would hear a lot of laughter around that sometimes too, right? But now I understand it better. And that understanding of time and place and position all come together in understanding our own social work practice, working with Indigenous folks, but also for those of us who are Indigenous folks. So some of the things we do with staff is we also, every staff member here is Indigenous. We have one Oneida and we have a Métis, and then the rest of us are Anishinaabe. And we carry bundles. We carry those items that help us, like our eagle feathers and our traditional medicine and our drums and our participation in ceremony, that first part of our bundle, which is our name and our clan and our community. We look at the world, we check in with one another to look at the world through our Indigenous lens, knowing that we live in a contemporary world and there's best practice all around us. You know, there's best practice all around us. And that rather than taking our Indigenous practice and making it bicultural to a Western best practice, we're utilizing our Anishinaabe best practice and bringing in Western best practice where it doesn't conflict with our Anishinaabe best practice. So we do a lot of land-based learning and healing. And part of our training is that relational worldview, and that came from NICWA and their former executive director, Terry Cross, who did a lot of research around social work best practice with Indigenous people. We find that the land helps us in the work that we're doing, the energies of the land and our connection to the land. We also are very aware of gaps in service in our area in particular, and creating safe spaces for those who don't have. Maybe a lot of you might be in big cities and there's lots of choices for resources. Here, not so much. So we stood back and we said, okay, where do we need to create opportunities for everyone to be seen? And one of the big areas that we've seen were no safe spaces for our LGBTQ2S plus folks and youth in particular, and also for those who have been involved with exploitation, or what we've coined as humanizing transactions rather than anti-human trafficking, because our communities have been very impacted by this phenomenon now, with the connection with gang-related activity, as well as the high incidence of addiction. So those pictures are just some of the work we've done. There's a ladies' hand drum group. That's me and my granddaughter. My hair is much whiter now than I was looking at the pictures of this slide deck, and I was like, oh, okay, I should update that. I've embraced my wisdom with the white hair. Also in the middle there, that's a picture of a language immersion that we participated in. One of those pictures is of medicines hanging to dry. And then some of the land-based activities is the winter one where we did ice fishing and snowshoeing and really created those opportunities for people in their wellness outside of the typical therapy session. So, oops, I'm gonna move this thing over. So a big part of also our Indigenous social work practice and what that means to us, it's, it's about storytelling. It's about unfolding that bundle, whatever bundle we're using. If I'm sitting and doing full moon ceremony and woman's teachings and young woman's teachings, then I unfold that bundle to you. Sometimes it's a tangible thing that we can see, like a feather or a grandfather's stone that I'll use, because my teachings say that that stone can take and handle, all the anger that can be built up in a person. And so I might use that, or those grandfathers, those Mishonas that come into the sweat lodge to help do the work for the people that are searching for something that come into that lodge. So that might be the bundle I unfold for the work I'm doing there. If it's somebody, because I can do both, that bicultural practice, because there are people that come through the door for a visit who want to do EMDR therapy, and I can provide that as well. And sometimes incorporating a smudge and maybe using the drum as the bilateral, because it's auditory as well as the bilateral with the eye movement. And that's what really the best practice is for us. It's not about me and what I can offer. It's about who's ever coming through my door seeking something. And maybe it's just for me to sit with them. Might be just for me to sit with them. And every one of our team here has that understanding that there's no power over dynamic, and there's and that we visit with people. So we also do, bicultural mental health and addictions, some systems developmental work. I said that we're working with the community around their customary code development, membership codes, election codes. We also do program development. We've done 4 residential treatment center program developments, land-based healing. We have a program called the Binesiwag program, and that's about seeking knowledge, and that's our humanizing transactions program. And it's about, again, going back to creating those safe spaces. And sometimes we are the safe space. Maybe it's not coming through the doors of your organization or your office, but maybe it's just you being the safe space, offering a smile, offering kindness, being open and not afraid of people's pain and trauma, and bearing witness to their story. And also that best practice around navigating systems, because for a lot of our Indigenous folks, navigating systems can be a really scary task, and someone just to walk with them or lift them up to help them navigate some of those systems. So the Binesiwag program is about those humanizing transactions and really being like the human word is first. Okay. And the Q's and A's program is our Queers and Allies program, and that's creating safe space for Indigenous youth who haven't come out yet, or who have come out, but their families are struggling, or they're struggling to find their place, and helping connect them to those elders and knowledge keepers that hold those teachings on those two spirit and what that meant to us traditionally. And we do training and capacity building around some of the stuff I'm talking to you about. So right from the governance level to the grassroots, on the ground, in the trenches with the people level. And we use our storytelling bundles to do that because most of us here are also peer workers, meaning that we've had experience in what we're talking about, what we're training, or when we're visiting with people. Our humanizing transactions helper or anti-bear is Jessica Wilson, and she shares her story of her experience being trafficked. And Bobby Hudon is our, he identifies as queer, and he runs our Q's and A's program, creating those safe spaces for youth who are questioning or just needing that safe space in that community and giving them hope. So that's how storytelling is incorporated into our best practice as well. I'm just going to share with you a quote because in the beginning, in locating myself, I shared with you that, that's my story too, my personal story of being intergenerationally impacted by the residential school system. And prior to starting my healing journey, and this year I'll be 20 years sober, have to celebrate ourselves too. I had to choose to put down those things that were interfering with my spirit and interfering with my gifts that I can bring as being a helper. So I shared that I had those experiences. I had, I didn't believe in myself. I was in a really abusive marriage, and back then I'm since now in a really good marriage. But I shared this quote with you because a lot of us who come into social work and are looking to reconcile something within ourselves, and we know that. And as long as we're acknowledging it, then we're not, trying to heal ourselves on the back of others. So this quote I'm going to share with you is from a Facebook post I did, just before the pandemic, I guess. Let your moments of self-doubt be that, just moments. Those moments where those old tapes start playing. You aren't good enough. You will never be enough. If they knew you, really knew you, they would abandon you. All the while you are abandoning yourself. Don't let those moments be the moments that lead you down the rabbit hole of self-hatred, toxic shame, and take away hope. Let those moments be the moments that define you. Define the light that shines so bright. It is the light that others down the rabbit hole use to find their way out. Define you to feel the pain and see the truth, and to give you the motivation to keep going. Keep believing in yourself, even when it seems no one else does. Be the light, be the love, be the warrior for future generations. Let these moments be the moments, let those moments be the opportunity to grow, learn, do, and create a better world where your footprints are so deep that the next 7 generations can clearly see a path of love. And I share that with you today because oftentimes I didn't realize the impact I was having on individuals and on systems. And I felt like, especially when I worked in child welfare, I felt like, and I could get on a soapbox, man. I could really talk about what colonialism has done and, get up there. And as a trainer, and I trained all over Ontario, a bicultural way of, those, I think they're called the professional series now, but back then when I was doing it, I think it was called the New Worker series. And man, I could really get up there and talk a good talk. And I was a trainer, so I wasn't actually doing the work anymore, but I still felt like I was spinning my wheels. And I really didn't know if I was making any changes, if anything was changing, if I was being a helper, or if I was just perpetuating the status quo. Remember what George said? What legacy do you want to leave, Lori Flinders? Do you want to create real change, or do you want to just perpetuate the status quo? And I still ask myself that often, but I knew I had to get well. I knew I had to really live an authentic life and live what I believe. And sometimes that still brings conflict into my life. And I have to ask myself, is it worth it? And for me, it absolutely is worth it. So I am going to challenge you now. You are not here by accident. You are not a student of social work or a social worker or a visitor. You are not here by accident. And I challenge you to ask yourself, what legacy do I want to leave? Do I want to just keep perpetuating the status quo? Where do I need to unpack my privilege to not be a modern day missionary, but to be that true helper, a helper to the people? Whether you're in systems work or you're down in, or not down, sorry, or in the grassroots, in the trenches with the people. Ask yourself, what legacy do you want to leave? And I think I'm right on time, Vanessa. I see it's 10:02, so I could keep going and talk about these pictures, or
You are doing great for time, Lori. If you wanted to take actually a minute to talk about the pictures, I would be so interested, and I'm sure everyone else would. So please feel free, and then we'll move into Q&A.
okay, so these pictures that you see on your screen right now, I'm unfolding a little bit more of my bundle for you. So the little girl there is me. I was born, like I said, to a 17 and 18-year-old, and my dad is non-Indigenous. And for a long time, I struggled knowing my place, but that's another story for another time. And so there I am. And then there's me in high school. Don't you love that big fuzzy afro? Still kind of like that, but whiter and a little shorter. That's when I really started escaping that fear and insecurity, and started really getting into some drug use around that time. And the next picture, the black and white, is me probably about 10 years ago with my mom. And, that relationship has been very complicated over the years. And today we have done a lot of work, a lot of healing work with one another. And so that just shows you like the laughter, the good laughter. How do you know when there's lots of Indigenous women together? Because you can hear the laughter from all over the place. And that just kind of depicts that. The one picture is a roundhouse. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's like a safe space, sacred space where we do work. Each community, other than my own yet, has a roundhouse, and we do a lot of our training, but we also do a lot of our group work, whether it's an outpatient type of group work, or we've visited to do trainings in roundhouses as well. Down below is just some gatherings that with different folks that I've worked with over time. And the one picture you can see, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but this one down at the bottom, we participated in a water walk. And our elders and our knowledge keepers, and now I'm going to, say this out loud, that our water, she is in trouble. And it's so important for all of us to take this so very seriously. When I look into the eyes of my littlest grandchild, I have two babies. We had two babies born in 2020. Ben was born in September and Charlotte was born in November. When I look into those little faces, I think about what it's going to be like for them when they're my age, and what our natural resources, and especially our water. Like, here's the truth, man, we can't live without water. We can't. She gives us life. She gives life to the plant world and the animal world, and everything is being impacted by the water. So I've participated in a couple water walks, not the big ones that have happened, but I'm very close to those ones who have done. Josephine Mandamin was a part of our Medewin Lodge as well. And now Tasha Beads teaches me lots. She teaches me lots there about the importance of water walking and taking care of the water. So that's just a little bit of context. And again, that's about that legacy. So from that little girl who didn't know who she was and would be confused and felt like she had no place because she didn't know who she was, to the young woman who, went and escaped and lived out the trauma that was generational, to the woman who reconciled and is doing her best to role model and do the doings for her family, and then bringing that up to the all of the relationships that I currently participate in, including being a part of the OASW. So miigwech for having me. I'm really humbled. Sometimes on time limits I don't do well, but I hope my message was received, what I tried to give. So miigwech.